least, it is my pleasure to welcome Chris Capell back to the monthly meetup stage. Chris is on our DevOps team and is an Army veteran, dog dad, cancer survivor, and self-proclaimed Jedi master of DevOps. He has spent his career looking for ways to simplify designs, automate processes, and show how we can use technology to improve business processes. He lives with his dog Gizmo in the Cleveland suburbs. Chris, floor is yours. Ooh, spooky back. Love it.
Hello, welcome. Let me share something here. So today we're going to be talking about GitHub Composite Actions. I've talked about GitHub Actions before. GitHub Actions are basically just a, well, they used to call actions what they call our workflows today. So it's very confusing, but we know what composite actions are, so we'll talk about those here today. So what are composite actions? A composite action allows you to combine multiple GitHub run steps into a single step. So it lets you take your existing action and kind of export it so it can be reused. You can have inputs and outputs, so with defaults defined. So you can go through and create an action that has defaults that you can override. And this way you can have a generic action that people can use and send their specifics to that. Depending on where they are stored, you can use them in multiple workflows. You can use them in multiple repositories or even different organizations. And they're going to run, no matter where they're stored, they're always going to run in the context of the calling repository. So even if I go through and you have something that you're going to have on the public web, somebody uses your action, it's going to be running in context of their repository, not ours. Why would you want to use them? A few different reasons. If you have a workflow you want to share across different projects, you have 10 React projects, you want to have a workflow that's kind of common to them. This lets you go through and create a common workflow where all you're doing is saying, here are the inputs to that workflow. It allows you to go through and kind of make changes in one spot, and all your workflows will pick up that change. Maybe you have a workflow and you have a mono repo, which has lots of different projects within there. We're going to want to go through and maybe you have actions set up to build and deploy each of those projects individually, but they're all the same. This allows you to go through and make it easier. You have all your workflow. You can have 10 projects using the same workflow, just different input output parameters. And the last reason is if you want to share it to the world. Toby has a few actions we've gone through and published out there in the marketplace. I will show you that here in a minute. Where are they stored? Well, you can store them either in their own repository. If it's in their own repository, you can actually publish it to the marketplace for anyone to use. Or you can publish them in their own folder within a different repository. So you can have a folder within a repository with your action that every multiple project within that mono repo would use. Or you can have a folder within a shared library where you have different types of repositories that everybody in the organization might want to use. As long as the calling workflow has root access to that repository, they're set. Public repositories shouldn't be an issue. Private repositories should be fine as long as you're in the same organization. When you're calling them, you're going to be calling them in a similar fashion to any other action you will put in there. Excuse me. You use the organization, repository, and then either a branch or tag. If you have a repository, if it's just a folder within that repository, you would add another level there where you'd have the organization, repository, and the folder, again with a branch or tag. You normally see them with tags on there, so that I know that if I'm running this action 1.1.0, I'm always going to be using that action, and an update won't break my workflow. There could be issues where you maybe want to just use the master branch all the time. That's up to you. For Composite Workflow, you only need 3 files. And you need the README file, which would contain the example of how to use it, and documentation. We like to show where all the variables are that you can put in there would do. A license file. We use the MIT license normally. GitHub, you can put the license file in any project real easily by just selecting add file, add new file, and if you give the new file the name just license, it'll actually bring you up a list of templates that you can use. And then the last would be the action YAML, which is actually the workflow itself, and that's where all the work takes place. So here's a copy of the action YAML part 1. We can see we've given it a name and description. That name and description would be showing up in the marketplace if you publish it to the marketplace. In addition to the branding, if we publish it in the marketplace, Patovi, we are a verified publisher, so it actually uses our Patovi icon and our logo. Inputs are where we really would want. Checkout here, I put in here if I should do the checkout command. I don't require that, and I give it a default. Same with the path. It's going to be the path that I'm going to pick up and compile as part of the build. And for the outputs, I'm going to output the page URL. I'll show you how that works in a minute. The rest of it is going to look like any other workflow action you have. It's going to run using Composite. I give it the steps that I need, and within here you can see that I'm actually calling other actions as needed. I'm using an upload action. I'm using the checkout action. The upload action, I'm using the path, and then the deploy. This action right here that I'm building and I'm using that to deploy to GitHub Pages is actually using the new method, where instead of having a branch that contains the files for that specific GitHub Pages site, you actually go through and create an artifact and upload it, and that artifact would contain all the files for that site. Makes it a little bit cleaner. You don't have a extra branch hanging around that has files. So here's the actual GitHub workflow YAML that I would then add to use that action I just created. A lot of this you can see is probably not even needed. I'm going to run it on a push to main. I added the workflow dispatch so I can just run it manually. And then I have the one step. I gave it an ID just so I know what it is. And there it is using the action. I didn't actually have to define any other variables in there, just because that's all I needed. And here's the deploy file having gone run. We can see that it ran successfully, and then it gave me a link here I can't click on because that's just a picture. Couple thing about GitHub Workflows I just want to add here is that when you run a workflow, it's going to use the workflow file in the branch that triggered it. So if you have a main branch and a development branch, and your development branch triggers the workflow, it'll use whatever workflow environment is in that development branch, which may or may not be the same as which would be in the master branch. It's a good way to be able to go through and test workflows outside of your main branch. The second caveat I want to put in here is if you have an on-demand workflow with workflow dispatch, it has to exist in the default branch before you can run in any other branch. And the workflow in the default branch just needs to be on workflow dispatch with a name. So workflow dispatch YAML, and just have that one line in there for workflow dispatch. And then as long as that YAML file is the same in a different branch, you can go through and manually trigger it. There's a branch drop down when you trigger it to let you decide which branch you want to run it against. So let's go over here to a demo real quick. Here in the marketplace, there's lots of actions. You can search for some fun stuff. Search for Batovi, you see the actions that we have, again, with our logo here. The one that I've been showing off here today was the deploy React to GitHub pages. If you go to it, it's going to show you information about this. This is basically just the README file. So especially if you're moving this to the marketplace, you want to make sure you have a good README file with examples, all the inputs, and information about the license. And we put some provided by Batovi, so we try to drive some traffic. If I want to, I can even go back to the repository and take a look at it. And there it is. I'm going to show where I use it now. So that was used in the training React app. I'm not going to run this again because we've run it many times. But there it is. I can see it deployed. If I want to go through, I can look at the artifact produced. I don't think the artifact, I can't look at it anymore. So you'd have to look at it pretty much right after you created it. And then I had the URL I exported. I exported the URL so it shows up right here. So it's nice and easy to use. And there's the site where you can play tic-tac-toe.